All right, in our last video, we went over the current liability known as sales tax payable. And we reviewed journal entries, calculations, remittance, all of that. Now we're going to go on to another current liability, short-term notes payable. Okay, now notes payable, right? It can be short-term or long-term. It just depends specifically on the notes due date, right? So is it 1 year or less, then it's a short term. If it's more than 1 year, it's long-term. Now the calculations that I'm going to show you, the journal entries I'm going to show you for the short-term note payable are the same as they would be for a long-term. And this is covered more in topic 12.4 of your textbook if you want to read through that in more detail. All right, so let's start with what is a note payable? Now, it's a cousin to accounts payable, right? Accounts payable were obligations to outside parties, right? Or creditors, right? Normally, there are suppliers or vendors, normally owed to our suppliers, right? Vendors, someone we're buying our inventory from, for example. The credit term, it's usually 30 to 60 days, okay? And there is usually no interest charged, okay? And we know the journal entry was whatever we gained. So let's say that we were buying inventory, and if that purchase was happening on accounts, your credit offset was accounts payable. Okay, so that would be your journal entry. Now, notes payable. These are also obligations to outside creditors. Okay, it's structured a little bit more formally. Okay, so it's structured more formally, meaning there has to be a written agreement in place. There must be a written agreement. That written agreement is called a promissory note. You've probably had to sign one if you've ever taken out a car loan, a student loan, any type of loan. You've had to sign a promissory agreement. It was a formal agreement between the two parties, between the creditor and the borrower. Okay, that creditor can take the form of a vendor, right? Or a bank, some sort of lending institution. Okay. And it's different from accounts payable in that it's a longer payback period, longer credit period, right? So it's not 30 to 60 days. It's usually a few months to up to years. So it's going to be a longer credit period, and there is going to be interest involved. Okay, so they're similar. They're both debt, right? Accounts payable and notes payable. They both come about because of debt. They're obligations to an outside party. They have a length of time before credit needs to be repaid. One has interest, the other does not, generally speaking. Okay. We said it's a formal agreement. So there's a promissory note. Let me show you what one of those could look like. Okay, so here's a sample promissory note. It's also in your chapter. And each one might look a little different, but it still has to contain the same basic information: the date the note was created, the principal, which needs to be repaid at maturity, the interest rate. Notice that that is always expressed as an annual interest rate, or APR, annual percentage rate. The due date. Here it's 2 years. That would be a long-term liability, right? The borrower, right? The one that's in the debt of the other. And the creditor who will be receiving the payment of the principal plus interest. in 2 years. Okay, so again, the note might look a little different, but it should contain this key information. All right, let's go back. I didn't quite give you the journal entry for the notes payable. So let's look at that next. So there's different situations that can create a note payable. Okay, so let's look at these. The first one is a loan. Okay, like if you take out an auto loan, student loan, anything like that, if you take out a loan, right, it's a formal agreement between two parties. There's usually interest involved. So that is going to be a note payable. You want to increase the note payable, so you will credit it. And if it's a loan, you're getting cash. So that would be your journal entry if the note was created because of a loan. Let me do it in a different color, just to make it fun. Cash, notes, payable. The other common situation could be purchase of an item, right? Just like on accounts, we purchased inventory. You could be working with a creditor that says, you know what, we don't extend accounts payable, we only work with notes payable. Totally fine. Then our journal entry would be to debit the item. Let's say we purchase, let's say it's still inventory. So inventory could be equipment, could be a vehicle, could be a building, right? Whatever the item is that we purchase, we'll debit that to increase it. And your offset is a note payable. Okay, so in all these situations, note payable will be credited to increase it, right? Because we're creating a note. It just depends on what the other side is. And then lastly, a note can be created as a way to pay off other debts, other existing debt. Okay, it's kind of like paying off a credit card with another credit card. It's doable, not advisable, but it's doable, right? So maybe we're paying off our accounts payable with a note payable. Okay, so all three of these are common situations that lead to a note being created. We'll see all three in the chapter, either in homework or a quiz or something, but they all result in a note being created or credited. All right. Let's look at an example next. So I'll make a separate video with an example of one of these situations so we can find out the journal entry involved.